In the courtroom, where every word weighs like iron and every glance can change destinies, an unexpected encounter was about to challenge ingrained convictions. Amid echoes of the past and unspoken silences, the truth would emerge from where it was least expected, and nothing would be the same again. In the heart of a bustling city, within a courthouse of towering columns and cold walls, two distant worlds were about to collide. The wall clock read 8:30 in the morning when Judge Margaret Hale entered through the side door, her heels echoing against the polished marble. Staff and lawyers immediately stood up, a show of respect that bordered on fear. Margaret never smiled when entering the courtroom. To her, smiles were signs of weakness, traces of a vulnerability she had vowed never to show again. At 58 years old, her face bore expression lines that told stories of legal battles, but also of personal losses known to few. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Hale," announced the court officer. She adjusted the black robe over her impeccably tailored suit and took her place behind the dark wooden bench. Her gray eyes scanned the room like a radar, detecting every imperfection, every detail out of place. The night before, she had her usual chamomile tea alone in her spacious and empty living room, reviewing cases while the television murmured in the background. It had been her routine for more than 2 decades, ever since the divorce left her with nothing but her career. On the other side of the room, seated in the last row, Jeremiah Brown nervously adjusted the tie that his neighbor, Mr. Wilson, had lent him the night before. The suit, his only suit, hung on his thin frame as a reminder of better times. It had belonged to his father, carefully kept by his mother after his passing in a work accident 10 years ago. "It's all right, my son," his mother, Eleanor, had said that morning, ironing the suit for the 3rd time, trying to disguise the patch on the elbow. "The Lord doesn't look at clothes, but at the heart." Jeremiah smiled, remembering those words. His mother worked as a nursing assistant at 2 different hospitals to support the family after her husband's death. Even exhausted, Eleanor always found time to read stories to Jeremiah and his younger brother, James, and to remind them that dreams require hard work and unwavering faith. "First hearing of the day," announced the officer. "Witness Jeremiah Brown in the case State versus Wilkins." Jeremiah swallowed hard and walked to the center of the room. He had witnessed a robbery at the convenience store where he worked part-time after school, and now he needed to testify. His heart pounded against his chest as he tried to ignore the stares and whispers. It wasn't the first time he felt out of place in environments like that. Margaret watched the young man approach, immediately noticing the state of his clothes. The brown suit, several sizes too large, had signs of wear on the sleeves and a poorly disguised patch on the elbow. The pants slightly dragged on the floor, and the shoes, although polished, showed clear signs of wear. "Please state your full name and occupation," instructed the court clerk. "Jeremiah Thomas Brown, student and part-time employee at the corner market," he replied in a clear voice, contradicting his nervous appearance. Margaret raised an eyebrow. There was something about the young man's demeanor, a dignity that seemed to contrast with his worn-out clothes, that deeply disturbed her. "Mr. Brown," she spoke, interrupting the standard proceedings, "this is a federal court, not a community fair. Couldn't you have dressed more appropriately?" An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Jeremiah felt the heat rising up his neck, reaching his cheeks, but as his mother had taught him, he kept his eyes up. "I apologize, Your Honor," he responded in a controlled voice. "This is the only suit I own." Margaret felt a pang of irritation. To her, formality and appearance were extensions of character. How could someone present themselves in such a manner in a court? The court demands respect, and that outfit, it looks more like a costume than a suit. A muffled laugh echoed through the hall. The prosecutor hid a smile behind some documents. Margaret felt a momentary satisfaction for the control she exerted over the room, as she always did. Jeremiah lightly clenched his fist, feeling the sting of humiliation. However, his voice remained steady. "I understand, Your Honor. I apologize if my appearance disrespects this court. It was my father who taught me that respect is shown through actions and words, not just clothing. I am here to fulfill my civic duty." Margaret's eyes narrowed. Was there a veiled insolence in those polite words? She was not used to being challenged, even so subtly. She decided to move forward but made a mental note of the young man's attitude. As the interrogation continued, something unexpected began to happen. Jeremiah's answers were precise, articulate, and intelligent. He described the robbery incident with details that demonstrated an impressive memory and a keen observational ability. "And would you be able to identify the suspect again?" asked the prosecutor. "Yes, sir. He was wearing a navy blue coat with a tear on the right sleeve. He was approximately 1.8 million tall, had short brown hair, and a small scar above his left eyebrow. When he spoke to the cashier, I noticed a slight accent, possibly from the South." Margaret found herself paying increasing attention to the young man. How could someone so young, clearly from a humble background, express himself with such clarity and precision? There was a disturbing disconnect between the image she had formed and the reality that was unfolding. During a pause, while documents were being organized, Margaret noticed something falling from Jeremiah's pocket, a partially crumpled envelope. He quickly picked it up, but not before she saw a familiar crest in the corner. "Mr. Brown," she called abruptly, "what is that document that fell from your pocket?" Jeremiah hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. It's personal, Your Honor. It has no relation to this case." "In this courtroom I determine what is relevant," she retorted. "Show me." Reluctantly, Jeremiah handed the envelope to the bailiff, who took it to Margaret. She examined it with a neutral expression, but her eyes widened slightly upon recognizing the crest of Columbia University, one of the country's most prestigious institutions. Inside, an acceptance letter for the biomedical engineering program with a full scholarship. At the end of the letter, the distinctive signature, Dr. Richard Crawford, head of the department. The name hit Margaret like a punch to the stomach. Richard Crawford, a man she had not seen for almost 30 years, since they ended a relationship that seemed promising until differences in worldview drove them apart. Richard, too idealistic for her taste, had chosen academia while she dedicated herself to a legal career. "Do you know Dr. Crawford personally?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor," Jeremiah replied. "He is the advisor for the science project I developed at the public school, a low-cost device for the early detection of heart problems." The courtroom seemed to have suddenly shrunk. Margaret felt suffocated by memories she thought were buried. Richard had always believed in potential where others saw only limitations. Over time, she had become exactly the opposite. "Let's continue with the questioning," she said, handing back the letter, her voice betraying an unusual emotion. As the proceedings continued, flashbacks invaded Margaret's mind. She remembered her childhood in the poor part of town, how her father had worked tirelessly to pay for her education, how she had promised never to endure hardships again. Over time, she had built a fortress around herself, turning her own story into a well-guarded secret. She looked at Jeremiah again, this time truly seeing him. He was not just a poorly dressed boy, but a young man who, like her in the past, was fighting against the odds. The difference was that, while she had rejected her origins, he carried them with dignity. The trial was adjourned for lunch. As those present dispersed, Margaret remained seated, lost in thought. A knock on the door brought her back to reality. "Your Honor, Dr. Richard Crawford is here. He says he needs to speak with you." Margaret's heart raced in a way it hadn't in decades. Richard entered, older, with gray hair at his temples, but with the same kind eyes she had known so well. "Maggie," he said, using the nickname only he knew. "It's been a long time." "What are you doing here, Richard?" she asked, trying to maintain her usual composure. "I came to accompany Jeremiah. When he mentioned he would be testifying today, I decided to support him. I didn't imagine you would be the judge of the case." "You seem quite involved in that boy's life," she observed, unable to completely hide the jealousy in her voice. Richard smiled softly. Jeremiah reminds me of you, you know. The same determination, the same sharp intelligence. When I met him 2 years ago, he was using the school's lab after hours to develop a project that could help people like his mother, who suffers from heart problems. And the suit? Margaret asked, surprising herself with the question. It belonged to his father. He died in a construction accident. Jeremiah insists on wearing it on important occasions, even if it no longer fits. He says it's a way to honor him. Margaret felt a lump in her throat. I was cruel to him this morning. You've always been hard on those who remind you of where you came from, Maggie, Richard said gently. Do you still remember that patched coat you wore in your first year of college? What happened to the girl who didn't care about appearances? Richard's words hit a sensitive spot. Margaret remembered that coat well mended 3 times by her mother, who worked as a cleaner. She also remembered the day she threw it away, vowing never to wear anything again that revealed her humble origins. She grew up, Richard. She realized how the world really works. Or maybe she just forgot who she really was, he replied gently. When the court resumed its work, something had changed in Margaret. As she watched Jeremiah finish his testimony, she saw not just the young man in front of her, but also herself decades earlier, determined, full of dreams, fighting against a system that seemed designed to exclude her. At the end of the day, when the room was almost empty, she called Jeremiah. Mr. Brown, I would like to apologize for my behavior this morning, she said, the words sounding strange in her mouth. It was inappropriate and unfair. Jeremiah seemed genuinely surprised. There's no need, Your Honor. Oh, there is, she insisted. I judged you by your appearance, not by your character. It's the kind of injustice I promised to fight against when I became a judge. She hesitated, then continued. Your father would be proud, not just for what you've achieved, but for how you maintained your dignity today, even when I was disrespectful. Jeremiah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Thank you, ma'am, that means a lot. Columbia is an excellent university, she added. I had the opportunity to study there too, many years ago, with a partial scholarship and 3 part-time jobs. Jeremiah looked at her with newfound understanding. You too, Margaret smiled for the first time that day. I didn't always wear expensive suits, Mr. Brown. There was a time when my only coat had more patches than original fabric. That night, alone in her apartment, Margaret opened a box that she had kept closed for decades. Among yellowed photographs and old letters, she found a small fabric scrap, a piece of her mother's old coat that had been mended so many times. As she touched it, she finally felt the tears she had suppressed for so long flow freely. The next morning, Margaret did something that surprised everyone in the court. She implemented a mentorship program for students from underprivileged communities interested in legal careers. And the first invited mentor was Dr. Richard Crawford. 3 weeks later, Jeremiah received a package at his home. Inside, a new suit and a card that simply read, "For your future achievements." Appearance does not define who we are, but sometimes we need the right tools to open the doors we want to walk through. Judge M. Hale. When Jeremiah wore the suit for his high school graduation, his mother cried upon seeing him. His father's suit, carefully folded, remained stored as a precious relic, no longer a necessity, but a symbol of a journey that had begun long before him. At the ceremony, sitting side by side in the audience, were Judge Margaret Hale and Dr. Richard Crawford, witnessing not only the graduation of a promising young man, but also a living testament that hasty judgments can be rewritten, and that sometimes our greatest lessons come from the most unexpected places. And Margaret, watching Jeremiah receive his diploma with honors, finally understood that true justice begins when we stop judging by appearances and learn to see with the heart.